Yeah, we're now live, Chair.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to October's Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission meeting. So just to point out that it's currently an informal meeting because we're not porous at the moment in terms of the number of members that we currently have, members of the commission that we currently have in person in the room in the town hall. It will become a formal meeting hopefully when another member arrives, hopefully shortly. But until that point, we're unable to make any decisions as a commission. So just to be mindful of that. So I'll begin. So this is a currently informal meeting of Hackney Council, and all the usual constitutional requirements of council meetings apply. It should be noted that this meeting is being held as a hybrid meeting with members physically present here in the town hall and others connecting virtually. Officers attending the meeting are also connecting virtually. Can I remind members and officers whether you are present here in the town hall or present or connecting virtually, this meeting continues to be held in public and is being broadcast live via the internet. The rights of the press and public to record and film the meeting continue to apply, and the media representatives may be in attendance or viewing the live stream. In terms of operability, can you note the following? Unless you are speaking, please keep your microphone muted. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hands to get the attention of me, and please keep your camera on as this helps to identify who would like to speak. Before we start, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome Jackie back to the meeting. Jackie is the new Group Director for Children and Education Services who started in August. So on behalf of the Commission, welcome to Hackney and to the Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission. We're not sure yet, not that I can see at the moment, if we have any young people from Hackney Youth Parliament or Hackney tomorrow in attendance today. But it's worth noting that the Commission has amended its constitution to include young people from Hackney tomorrow, as well as the representation that we already have of children and young people from the Hackney Youth Parliament. And this is part of our renewed and ongoing efforts to engage and involve young people in our work as much as we can. So thank you for your patience. We're going to start the meeting. So we're going to start with apologies for absence. So we have a few. So I have apologies for absence from Councillor Sarah Young, Michael Lobenstein and Richard Brown. I have apologies for lateness from Councillor Sizer, who will be connecting virtually.
Chair, just to say that Councillor...
do we have any other apologies for absence or lateness? Well, we've got Councillor Peters, who is... Councillor Peters will be late, and I think an additional Councillor Hanson is also going to be absent. Apologies for absence from. Do we have any others? Councillor Garcia, she's going to be. Got apologies for lateness for her also.
Chair,
yeah, is that it? Okay.
Chair.
Moving on to item 2. So there are no urgent items, and the agenda is as published. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest? Joe?
I'm a governor of St Thomas Avenue.
Sorry, no, hold on, we've just got some technical issues.
Better.
That might be better. Do you want to have a go now, Joe?
Hello, I'm a school governor at St Thomas Avenue.
Great, thank you. Shabnam?
No, I'm current governor at Grenfell Primary School.
Do we have any others?
And Councillor Sizer.
Councillor Sizer?
Good evening, Chair. It's Councillor Bramble on Councillor Sizer's device, just to say that she is here as well. We're just sharing the device, and I will log on elsewhere shortly after this first item.
Salma, did you have any?
Yes, item 6. I work for a children's centre, so I'll be sitting out on that one.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sizer, did you have any declarations?
No, she is. Sorry.
No, I did send an email to Martin to say that I've just taken over as a trustee of Ivy Street. So I don't know if that needs to be a declaration, but just to say.
Okay. Thank you. Noted. So now the first substantive item for this evening is item 4, the Ofsted focus visit. Since the Commission received an update on the improvement plan for children's social care in July, Ofsted have undertaken a further focus visit with children's services to assess arrangements for children in need and those children on a child protection plan. The outcomes of the focus visit were published in a letter by Ofsted on September the 7th, 2021, and this is included within the report pack, together with reports from the Children and Family Service. For this item, we have Jackie Burke, the Group Director of Children and Education, Diane Benjamin, the Director of Children's Social Care, and Lisa Aldridge, the Head of Safeguarding and Quality Assurance. We have 25 minutes for this item, so can I ask officers to highlight the key outcomes from the inspection and further development plans for no more than 5 to 10 minutes, and then we will have 15 to 20 minutes for questions. Handing over to you.
I think Councillor Bramble is going to open the item, Chair.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Chair. So just want to alert members to the progress of where we are. As we know, in children's social care, given the last time when we had an Ofsted judgment, Hackney wasn't at the place where we all wanted to be. I just want to start by commending the staff team for all of the work that they have done, the ability to be reflective and to move forward and to work as hard as we can to ensure that we are doing best for our children and families. The recent Ofsted focus visit, I think, highlights that Hackney now knows itself and knows itself well, which means that we are in a stronger position than we were before. And that gives me the confidence that we are moving in the right direction of travel. It doesn't mean that everything that we want or everywhere we need to be is still in the right place, but it does reaffirm that we're in the right direction of travel. Our aspiration is to be good and then work towards being outstanding, but it's a direction of travel and it has to be taken at every step. Sometimes I think, I do reflect on the pace, but actually it's better that we go at the right place and everything that we put in place is sustainable and transformational change that is embedded to make the difference that we want to see, rather than move too quickly at pace that then things begin to not work in the way that we want. And I'm just welcoming Jackie and Diane, and it's been a pleasure working with them both, and we've had several meetings about Ofsted and the service, and all of us share the aspiration of the service going forward, but that sits alongside the staff. Just to tell you, Chair, just remind you that I co-chair a Members Oversight Board where we meet monthly with members to look at Ofsted and the progression of that. And I have asked the new Chief Exec and spoken to Jackie about their role in co-chairing the officer equivalent of that going forward, so that every senior officer and us as members, including the Mayor, have the oversight of the service in the way that we want. What I would do, Chair, is start where I began in thanking the staff team for the work that they have put in, and just thank them for their hard work and embracing the direction of travel and the hard work. And I'm going to thank them in advance, Chair, for the hard work that's still to come. Thank you. Diane and Jackie, over to you. Jackie and Diane, over to you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bramble, for that. As you may be aware, Ofsted arrived the week before I started, at a time when the council had an interim chief exec, an interim director of children's services. The director of children's social care had only just arrived, and we were fortunate enough to have retained the interim director for children's social care for a full handover to Diane. So the whole leadership and all of the staff group rose to the challenge admirably. But I'm going to, because Diane and her team did the work for this focus visit, I'm going to hand over to them to walk you through the highlights and what they've done about the action.
Thank you, Jackie. So I just want to take you all through the headline findings in relation to our recent Ofsted visit. And just to note, Ofsted were actually on site. They were on site for 2 days. Staff absolutely rose to the challenge in terms of doing that hybrid meeting with Ofsted, as well as doing that online as well. So that's something absolutely to acknowledge as well, how well galvanised and we were ready for Ofsted's visit. But just wanted to take you through some of the headline findings. They noted that we now had dedicated scrutiny by senior managers. They felt we had a strengthened management oversight. They felt risks to children were understood, and we responded appropriately to that. They felt we had a strong multi-agency working ethos in terms of working with our partners, health, police, education. They felt that really, really strongly came through. The inspectors, just as Councillor Bramble alluded to, the inspectors absolutely felt that the practitioners worked hard and are working hard. They were passionate. That tenacity was there in terms of working well with the children that they knew. They felt we were absolutely on a positive journey, and most importantly, they felt children were safe in Hackney. Key areas that they'd identified in terms of areas that we need to improve upon was the quality of our written work could be better. They felt that our case recording system needs to be managed better, and we need a system in place. Inspectors felt that we knew ourselves as an organisation, and they absolutely felt we were on a improvement journey. They identified that we knew where we needed to go in terms of that process, in terms of that journey. They felt that we were on that trajectory in relation to that. They also identified that children were not only safe, but the plans were sufficient, because the focus visit focused on children subject to SIN plans, subject to CP plans, and they felt within those plans, the plans were the right plans, they were proportionate and they were appropriate. So hence, absolutely acknowledging the hard work that we were doing with children, and that was evident in the work and as they were speaking to children and their families as well. So those were the key highlights. I'm going to hand over to Lisa now, just in terms of our action plan, where we see ourselves and that journey going forward.
Thanks very much, Diane. So in the report, we've highlighted some key actions that we have either taken or are underway. And just to say, at this point in time, it's in no way a fully fledged action plan. We need to take stock, reflect back on our Children and Families Action Plan following the ILACS inspection in 2019, and think about some ambitious next steps to really shape and develop the service in the best interest of our children. So I'm not going to go through all of those actions in the time we've got. I'm just going to refer to the key areas of improvement identified in the letter. In respect of the comments around the quality of written records, to provide a clear understanding of the child's history, shortly before Ofsted had arrived, we just introduced a new quarterly child summary report, which is a single place on the child's file to record a summary of their history, progress over the last 3 months, and the voice of the child. So that was fairly new. We've tweaked that very slightly and just rolled out an updated version of that across our staff following feedback from them. In relation to the case recording system, obviously the cyber attack has put us in the position of having to have an interim social care database for a period of time whilst recovery work is underway. It's fantastic that we've got an interim recording system in place, but it doesn't, it's not as user-friendly as practitioners would like, and doesn't provide the reporting functions that managers really need. So there's lots of work happening to improve that and think about next steps for a really effective recording system going forward. The final point, I think Ofsted found that there were aspects of children's files, and certainly evident in conversations with the practitioners, that they knew their children well, knew their voices, knew their experiences, but that wasn't reflected consistently throughout the entirety of a child's file. So we've got further work to do to embed in every aspect of a child's file. We'd already developed some guidance for practitioners, been rolling out some workshops, and the coming months will be about embedding that consistently across all aspects of the child's file. And I guess the last thing to say, just because it relates to that, is in relation to the comment around sometimes our plans being overly complicated in the wording and the way that written for families and parents. So our next step is to really refine that and look at how do we take a more engaging and inclusive approach by writing to parents about what we need to do with them to create change for their children rather than writing about them. So that's a key action to take forward. So I think those are all the key points that I wanted to share before we go back to questions. I'll just hand back to Jackie.
Thank you, Lisa. So we were hoping that we would very much keep the time, and respecting that all members of the panel will have read the papers. So we're very happy to take some questions from you now.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So I'll now go to the Commission. So just to note that Councillor Peters has just arrived. He might just be very small on your screen, so you may not be able to see him, but we are now quorate, so it's now a formal meeting. So, okay, now I'm going to be moving on to key lines of inquiry. So I know that Salma has a question that she would like to ask, and also Lynn would like to ask a question. Do you have one also?
Yeah, because I've been a member of the oversight group, I'm going to step back from this item.
Okay, we'll just start with those two. So Salma, and then Councillor Charlton, and then if any others have any questions to ask, please raise your hands. Okay, Salma.
Hi, so our question was really in relation to the voice of the child, which you gave us some feedback on. Wanted to know a little bit more about whether the voice of the child was in relation to not collecting the views of young people, or was it because staff we're recording this in the casework files. You did make you did refer to some new ways of working. Is there any evidence that this has improved recording the voice of the child? And also, how does children and families work with? How does children and families work with Hackney Tomorrow to improve the voice of young people in social care?
If we can take two questions, so we'll go over to Councillor Charlton and then answers from the. You should be okay. We haven't got them on at present.
It's just in relation to the record keeping. You know, notwithstanding the issues around the cyber attack, and you know, you've made a reference to, you know, the issue, but I just wonder if you could be more specific about, you know, what is being done to improve record keeping, and whether things like the cyber attack or, you know, the issues around record keeping will continue to be a barrier to a satisfactory outcome of, you know, future inspections. How far down that road are you, in other words, and you know, is it likely to be an ongoing problem or something that you can resolve fairly quickly?
Okay, over to you.
So Lisa's going to start answering the first question, and I'll take the question, and Diane will chip in, and I will take the second question. So Lisa and Diane.
Thank you, Jackie. So in relation to the voice of the child, so what we see through our own audit programme is social workers and practitioners do some really good direct work with children, engage them through a range of means according to their age and ability, record that in a visit on the child's file. When a summary of that then goes into the child's assessment, their views can be maybe slightly filtered, and by the time that goes through to a plan, perhaps a report to a child protection conference, etc., and a subsequent plan, what we see is a filtering of the child's views. So it gets, I guess, more and more edited throughout that process. So by the end of that process, it's much harder to see exactly what the child has said. Apart from, obviously, we do have some children attending child protection conferences, and we have an advocacy service supporting children share their views directly at conferences. That's a very, very powerful means of having their views shared. So I think the piece of work is around how do we take the child's views and experiences and keep that recording consistently through, rather than editing and sort of creating a much briefer narrative where we may be at risk of losing the essence of actually what the child was communicating with us. So that's that big piece of work. I mean, Ofsted didn't review so much this time, but I know that Hackney of Tomorrow have done a fantastic array of pieces of work over the past year. For example, one of the most recent pieces of work has been reviewing our looked after review approach? Is it child friendly? Is it engaging? What can we do better? So I think that's probably one of our areas of strength, and in terms of engaging the voices of a cohort of looked after children to develop our services, I think the area for development is more about individual children's voices being carried consistently through their individual files. And just in relation to families, in our plans to develop an improved approach to recording assessments and plans, so they're writing to families rather than about them. We're going to engage a focus group of parents in that piece of work so that we actually get it right rather than thinking that we know best. So that's going to be a piece of work that we're going to be setting up and leading up over the coming months, doing some collaborative work with families that have experienced our service, so that we get it into the best way that we can.
And just to echo that, Lisa's right. Ofsted were when they were looking at our files, they were saying the consistency wasn't there in terms of the voice of the child. So they ask of us, and it's about how we improve that consistency, because it's there. That narrative is there. Family, the way social workers write, they're able to do it, but Lisa's right. It does get watered down as the process. As a journey for that child through the system continues. So it's about how we create the space so practitioners, social workers can have that consistency of the way they write, and making sure that the voice of the child is evident through all the way through that process. So something that we're alive to and we're aware of.
Can I just come in before you respond to that other question? Something that we were just reflecting on actually in the pre-meet actually was that how important it is for us as a commission to hear the voice of the child as well, and just and whether this this comment from Ofsted can sort of prompt us to all start thinking. I mean, we are already as a commission are thinking about how we can better engage children and young people in the commission, because there's something that feels quite unnatural about the fact that the very service users who we're talking about are not really involved in this process at all. Well, certainly not in this meeting, and so I think that if we can try to include the voice of the child in as many of the reports that we have, so that we can understand what the experiences are of service users and their families. I think it helps for us very much to bring to life the reports and the comments that you make on the work that's being done on the ground. So yeah, we're with you on those efforts. So yes, so then to Councillor Charlton's question, if anybody wants to come in on that one. It was about recording systems.
Sorry, so sorry, I glitched out for a minute and I couldn't quite hear. So I'll come in on the recording system. So the effect of the cyber attack is a considerable challenge to us getting a favourable outcome for any future graded Ofsted inspection, unless we have a system that is absolutely fit for purpose. So our current system does not give us the ability to provide Ofsted with the information they need for any graded inspection in the timescales that we need to provide it. So we are working really closely with our colleagues in IT in-house. We're working really closely with Serverlec, who is the provider of the system that we were working on, on Mosaic, where we lost our data to the cyber attack. And we're in close conversation with Ofsted, and we've got a meeting with Ofsted and the DFE coming up to discuss what our next steps will look like. We've got some really key decisions about what to do next. And we've engaged the new chief executive in helping us to make the right decision, because we have to make decisions about the system in adults and system in children, and also what opportunities there might be for us in future for some greater read across with children in education when we look at our recording systems. So in short, it is a significant issue for us. So we do have a system whereby practitioners can write down and store information that they from visits and from their assessments and from their conversations with children and families in Hackney and from our partners in Hackney. But the way the system is set up, because it's an interim system and it's a minimum viable product, we're not able to search on it in the way we can with the Mosaic system that we had. We're not able to retrieve information in the same way. We're not able to gather performance information in the way we could pre-pandemic. So it is a considerable and it's a significant issue. Ofsted really recognised this when they came for the focus visit, and you know, very much were sympathetic to us in the moment. But from now on, we've got to work at pace so that we can have a very viable recording system at the earliest opportunity. So we've had some really helpful meetings with IT colleagues this week. As I say, we've got a meeting with Ofsted and the DFE coming up, and we've engaged the chief exec to help us to make the right decision and to endorse any decisions we're making so that we can move at pace to have a better and more viable and compliant recording system.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Do we have any other questions from the Commission?
I just got one more.
Yeah, sure.
I just wonder. I've read the action plan, but for you, I mean, I think you've answered one of the key milestones. I'm just interested in what are the key milestones for you as, you know, head of service. You know, what you know, firstly to becoming good and then to becoming outstanding. I mean, I think obviously the recording is one of those, but are there others that you'd like to mention?
I think it's about, as you say, from you know, where we are now to getting to good, and then from good to getting to outstanding, and for me that is about consistency of practice and how we achieve that across the board. It's absolutely about taking the recommendations from Ofsted and our previous improvement plan as well, and having one plan so we're clear about what that looks like, so we can absolutely work towards that trajectory in terms of getting to good and then getting to outstanding. So yeah, in answer to your question, in terms of we know what we need to do. It's part of our journey in terms of getting to good and outstanding. You know, the voice of the child was just one element in terms of what we'd highlighted today, but there are absolutely other streams of work that we're doing in terms of getting us to that trajectory for good. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, and sorry to now be going back to a previous point, but something I think that comes to mind about the recording issues, because I know that in a previous meeting we heard how services have really come together, your partner agencies have come together to really supplement the efforts that you've made to have a firm grasp on what's going on for children and families, which I know it's been a really trying time, particularly with the pandemic also. Are there legitimate concerns about us having missed anything because of the reporting, you know, because of the constraints that we're under with limited sort of services that we're able to access in terms of reporting? Is there any, you know, real concerns about
that? Our reporting ability is fairly limited because of the recording system we have. We do know where children are, which, you know, when you think where we were after the attack almost a year ago, in terms of where children are and the status of those children, whether they're looked after, whether they're child in need, whether they're, you know, subject to child protection plans, we have that information, and we have been able to store all of the records of our meetings with professionals, with the children, with their families. We have this. So the issue for us going forward is when we decide which system we're going to have going forward, we will be migrating this information into whatever that system is. So that takes quite a lot of work to get the information ready to be migrated into a substantial system. So so we won't have missed anything, but we are significantly hampered in terms of our reporting.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. I have another question just to ask about staff, because I think that staff have been under a considerable amount of pressure since the results of the inspection in 2019, and they've, you know, the service has undergone quite a few changes, and changes are still underway. We've got senior, you know, leadership changes that you've already identified earlier on. How are staff responding to these challenges that they're experiencing at the moment, and changes to service delivery?
I think staff absolutely responding well. I think there was certainly some concerns about morale, but that seems to one can see the difference now in terms of staff. When we had the focus visit, even those that weren't involved in the visit, they absolutely felt that sense of hope, that it was acknowledged and recognised the hard work that they were doing with children and families. And they are absolutely buoyant and ready for the changes, and they're absolutely 100% behind what we need to do to get there. There are some long-term members of staff who have been in Hackney through all those changes, and they are pleased with the changes. And I think we are going at pace. I think one of the issues was, is it going too quickly? But I think that's acknowledged now that the pace is the appropriate pace to be going. So I think staff are fine. I think one has to consider how one manages different types of members of staff in terms of how they're managing the system, etc. But on the whole, as a director, I can absolutely feel it feels the temperature feels really good at the moment.
It is good. It's encouraging to hear, and I know that initially, before as part of the action plan, staff consulted at length about proposals for change and their response to the inspection. And I just wonder are there plans to continue that, to have that ongoing communication with staff and consultation with staff about how they are responding to the changes?
Yes.
Yes, Chair, we have quite a rich forward plan in terms of our communication, our engagement with staff. We got really excellent support from our in-house comms team in Hackney. So we've had a number of live stream and staff engagement events. I had three meetings in my first 2 weeks with the whole staff group as part of an introduction. I think this is week 9 for me. We've had a whole staff conference last week. Diane hosts events regularly, so we've got quite a big platform, and we use the virtual world really successfully with our staff and consult with them around a number of issues. But in terms of pace and improvement, we will always have pace, we will always have improvement. There will never be a point at which we feel we've got there. So it's really important that our staff understand that, and they feel energized because that they're able to see that as a result of the changes, the improvements they've made, they're having a real impact on children and families in Hackney, and that itself is motivating. So as I say, having a system and having a quality assurance system where we're able to reflect that back to them, and also really good feedback from children and their families themselves, that makes a huge difference.
Thank you. Lisa, did you want to come in? Sorry.
I was only going to add to that, if that's okay, that I think the focus visit letter, recognising the positive trajectory that we're on, really validated for staff the sort of fruition of their hard work, their tenacity through the pandemic, through the cyber attack, through the changes that have been underway. So I think that's had a really positive impact on staff. Actually, their hard work's being recognised, and outside and inside we can see that it's having an impact for children. And also in terms of changing around ways to working, we're spending increasing amounts of time collectively together in the office within small teams or units, and staff have reported that's a really positive shift as well. Still a lot of work happening in the virtual world, but the opportunity to come together with colleagues when you're doing highly demanding and complex work can't be underestimated, really.
Thank you, Lisa. And it seems like it's just in time for Councillor Sizer, and the lights just went out for you guys, but I think you had a question that you wanted to ask.
Sorry to confuse you, Chair, it was me waving. Just to say that Diane and I have already done a walk the floor, albeit it was a small amount of team that we've met with. Jackie and I are due to do that. And what I'm hearing from staff is that the competence level has grown, and I think staff are now feel more comfortable to escalate if there's an issue and talk to managers in a way that really wasn't coming to the surface before. As Jackie said, we had the staff conference that I spoke at, and staff were very receptive of that, from hearing from me, but also the feedback from the sessions was quite positive. I'm not saying that everybody would say everything's perfect, but what I would say, there's a better culture and confidence within the service. If there is something wrong, they can escalate it and feel confident that it will be addressed by a manager. And I think that wasn't there before. So just want to commend Diane, who literally hit the ground running when she came, and then on board having Jackie as well. My engagement with them has been really positive, and we've met several times, whether it's formal, informal meetings or on the end of the phone, just discussing the service staff and the progression going forward. So just to reassure you, there is good communication, and that will continue. And in part of that listening exercise, if staff are saying we're still not listening well enough, we'll ensure that the steps are put in place so everyone feels heard.
Thank you for that.
Actually, Shabnam had a question.
Shabnam, did you have a question? So I think you.
My question was actually on staff feedback, which you raised. Though I would like to ask, there was a staff survey taken in July of this year. Just wanted to ask possibly what challenges were raised from that, or what concerns, and what changes have been made as a result, if any.
Hi, yeah, so I'm happy to start to respond to this. So we undertake regular staff surveys. The one in July was a general staff survey across the whole of the service. I'd say, you know, the overall response was positive in terms of staff enjoying working for Hackney Children and Families, feeling that they had a sense of autonomy around their work, feeling that managers were supportive through the pandemic. There were lots of positives that came out. So overwhelmingly positive. There were some key areas of learning for us. I think the strongest theme that came out was around bringing staff on the journey through change and the pace of change that had taken place. And there have been multiple layers of changes that our staff have experienced. So in our leadership team, we're just in the process of formulating our actions in response to that survey to share back with staff, as you said, we heard what we will be doing. So listening to staff voice about the pace of change and how we engage staff through change processes is going to be key. Notwithstanding, obviously, all of those changes were absolutely critical to get us where we are now, but it's about embedding and bringing staff along with us now. And the other key issue was around, I guess, well-being, managing stress. Like for many workers in many organisations, in the context of the pandemic, with a cyber attack layered on top of a complicated and demanding area of work, it's a priority area. It continues to be a priority area for us. We've got a lot of options and work in place, but we've got new options and new ways of working coming forward. For example, we trialled something called Schwartz rounds over recent months that had really positive feedback. It was evaluated by the What's Work Centre, really positive. So we're looking to see how we can embed that that approach going forward. So yeah, I think those are the key things to highlight.
Thank you very much for that. And very briefly, do we have an expected time frame for the next full inspection?
In my last conversation with our senior HMI, they indicated they will be back within the next 12 months for another focus visit. And then thereafter, the next time they come, it will be a graded inspection. So, so we are, of course, you know, we're ambitious, and so the plans that Diane is putting together with her service aren't just about the things that Ofsted said we need to do better. They are spelling out the ambition for what it's going to look like when we've got good and outstanding services. So we are kind of focusing on a number of areas, particularly adolescents. We're really doing a bit of prep around what our work with adolescents is, because we know that Ofsted has an interest in that at the moment. So we're always going to be on the ready.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for that update. I really do hope that, you know, you can find a way around the issues or you know, the extent to which the recording issues are really hampering your efforts at the moment. I can only imagine how difficult that must be for staff, especially just coming out of a pandemic, or the full throes of the pandemic, should I say. But in terms of this item, this is something that we will continue to review, the Children's Social Care Action Plan, when this is updated, and this is an area that the Commission will maintain oversight of for the remainder of the year to ensure that the progress is sustained. So now moving on to our next substantive item, which is item 5, the Youth Justice Update. So in July, there was a themed inspection of 9 youth justice services, which included Hackney. This item was intended to be an opportunity for the Commission to consider the outcomes of the inspection and the service response. However, the report of Her Majesty's Inspectorate was not published when expected on the 4th of October, and Youth Justice Services kindly provided a short briefing for members, which provides a useful update and contextual information about the service. For this item, we have Jackie Burke, the Group Director of Children and Education, Diane Benjamin, the Director of Children's Social Care, and Brendan Finnegan, the Youth Justice Service Manager. We have 45 minutes for this item, although I'm conscious that we've gone over, so if we can try and keep this as brief as possible. So can I ask officers to present the key information in 5 minutes ideally, and then we can have about 20 to 25 minutes for questions. So handing over again to officers.
Thank you, Chair. So Brendan Finnegan is going to present the main issues in his report, but fundamentally, we would, just to be absolutely clear, we were selected for the HMIP inspection not because we were seen as a problem, but we were seen as being a diverse borough. And fundamentally, a number of the issues that were highlighted as part of the inspection, we had identified and we were working on already. So in terms of our plans going forward for our children who offend in Hackney, we absolutely embrace those, but we're also really embracing what does it mean for children who disproportionately end up in children who offend services. It means that somehow, somewhere down the line, some of their needs have not been met. So we need to really be thinking of the system wider about how can we spot need earlier, how can we meet need earlier, and how can we really make a difference to some of our children in Hackney who disproportionately it's Black and mixed heritage boys. So I'm going to hand over to Brendan now to take you through the key highlights of this report.
Thank you, Jackie, and good evening, councillors. As Jackie said, a statutory multi-agency partnership managing children who have come into contact with the youth justice system. The big headline for me is to remind you that at any one time, fewer than 1 in 100 children aged 10 to 17 in the borough are involved in youth crime in any way at all, whether that's informally or formally. So despite Hackney's reputation, fewer than 1 in 100 of those children, 99% of children are doing well in difficult circumstances. Now, of course, of those 1 in 100, fewer than 1 in 100 children who get involved in crime, we are overrepresented by Black and mixed heritage boys in particular, and girls are underrepresented in general across youth justice. And that actually of those disproportionately, it's even worse when we talk about the more serious end, remanding children into custody or sentenced to custody. Very significant disproportionality, far higher than 65% of Black and mixed heritage children in the general population. Unfortunately, at times, it's been 90–95%, if not 100% of children experiencing detention by the state are Black or mixed heritage. In terms of, despite that, in terms of the outcomes we have, I'd say that we have low numbers of first-time entrants, children coming into the system. As I said, the numbers were down to 79 last year, but have been below 100 for the last 3 years who are new to the youth justice system. That those children involved in out-of-court disposals, which is the early intervention, 82% of those children don't come back, aren't arrested for a formal youth justice sanction in the following year. It's an excellent performance, and that explains why some of the low numbers we have in our post-court work. And in our reoffending, which is often the measure of success in youth justice, but it's not the only measure, that our reoffences per child reoffender are below many of our neighbouring boroughs, what they call the yacht family, the London average and certainly the England and Wales average. Now, it's not all rosy in the garden. I've talked about the disproportionate number of children in the system and exposed to remand and custodial sentencing. We also want to do better around our education, training and employment. Absolutely certain education is a key preventative factor. And whilst we're doing well, 69% of children at the end of their order are in full-time education. And remember, many of these are years 12, 13, 11, 12 and 13 who have had poor schooling records engaged with previously. We'd like to get to 80% and above of that figure, but we are far, we do achieve a relatively good rate. The other matter of concern is that the violence, the use of weapons and robbery are our top offences, along with possession with intent to supply. And interestingly, that profile is the same irrespective of ethnicity. White boys, black boys, mixed heritage boys, that's the offence profile, which makes the disproportionality in sentencing even more stark for us in that process. Now, in terms of that irrespective, how do we deliver such relatively good outcomes? And that's based on our staff profile and the willingness, the professionalism of our staff, but also because we take a child first, offender second approach. We are developing what we call a trauma-informed approach, where we are responding to children's emotional development as well as their adolescent development. We don't treat them as mini adults. We don't think they're always responsible, always for their time. What we do is we try to understand their family's narrative, their experience of growing up in Hackney, and to reflect that both to the court, but also how we manage to assist them to meet many of the unmet needs. And in fact, high levels of abuse, neglect, harm, as well as unmet educational needs have been identified in the population. We take a strengths-based approach, the Good Lives model, and desistance, building strong adult relationships. And the staff in youth justice, that's their skill, to build strong relationships in what is admittedly an area of work. We are agents of the state, and there are high levels of distrust of the state amongst many of our populations, certainly in some black and mixed heritage, but also our white boys population. So we're working in that context, and my staff, who strongly reflect the community they serve, and our partners are working to try to meet needs, put offending into context, not condoning behaviour, but explaining it and looking forward to the future. I think I'll stop there, and I can deal with questions on as they come. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Brendan. I think I'm going to kick us off with a question about disproportionality. So obviously the national data suggests that there is a growing racial and ethnic disparities in youth justice. We've all seen also the Lamy reports, and most of us, I'm hoping, will have also read the local youth-led charity Accounts report on stop and search within the borough, which raised some really alarming figures, and this was explored in Living in Hackney earlier on this year, I believe. How do we deal with these racial disparities? How are we tackling them and responding to them, given that we've got some really solid evidence that the system is treating black children in particular disproportionately? You know, as a service that is responding to children who have already passed through, often, you know, who've already interacted with the police, how are we supporting these children and families? So I'll start you off with that one, and then I've got a couple of follow-up. Did you want to answer that?
I think what I'd say is the strategic. Yeah, I'll take that, Chair. Well, we've begun by actually having a strong data analysis, and that's one of the indications that Lamy said. Can you track and explain? And at the moment, our strategic partnership, the Safer Young Hackney Board, has the data and is seeking explanations from the police around particularly stop and search. So in the summer, our police colleagues came to the table, reviewed 20 or 30 stop and searches, and where they found poor practice, they've responded within their organisation to give words of advice, retraining and identification of that process. And similarly, in our November meeting, we'll be talking about red dot stops and taser stops of children and use of tasers on children. Now that's on a strategic level, it's on that agenda, but on a practical level, our staff talking about a lived experience, it's ensuring we are advocates for children and families to ensure that they know how to respond to repeated stops and search and possible harassment or threats, to use the processes through the Independent Office of Police Complaints if necessary in terms of the police. So we will support children and families, acknowledge the harm and the damage that people have feared that process, but give them a route to get a voice to be advocate for that process.
Thank you for that, Brendan. And this is, it's encouraging to hear that we're supporting families to bring those challenges, especially to, you know, issues that are documented as being problematic. You know, this is not hearsay. This is not what people are thinking and feeling. This is what is actually happening. And I know many of us will agree that the way that black children are treated by the criminal justice system has quite significant bearing on the overrepresentation of black children within the criminal justice system for a variety of different reasons. But this brings me on to something else about adultification, because I'm noticing, even in my line of work, that we're starting to, even just hearing you, Brendan, saying that we're looking at child first and offender second, I'd actually quite like us to not look at them as offenders at all, actually. I know that sounds like a bit of a weird thing to say, but to look at it as offending behaviour, a bit like we never say that it's a naughty child, you've done something that is naughty, that you are always a child first, a person first who has done something. And obviously the data that we have about children and young people is that there are a variety of really awful things that they experience that lead them to doing awful things, albeit to other young people or other people in general. But how far have we got with exploring adultification? The adultification in particular, for those of you who may not know what that means, it's about some children who being treated as if they are older than they actually are. So being seen as being more culpable for their actions because they may, you know, have reached a level of physical maturity earlier. So they might be 14 and be 6 foot with a full beard, and they may be treated very differently to another child, perhaps from another ethnic group who might look very different. Evidence suggests that this is the case, and this is something that particularly affects black girls, ethnic minority children more broadly. And may have some bearing on the way that the criminal justice system is also treating children and young people. Can you tell me if there's any work that's being done on that?
Yeah, Chair, I'll take that again, and I'll put the context of saying you mentioned LAMI. I've just received a draft report from Middlesex University that shows that our early intervention work done by Young Hackney Prevention and Diversion isn't statistically significant, isn't received in a statistically significant way despite any child's ethnicity. Children get equal access to early diversion, to be diversion from the former youth justice system in Hackney. Now, and that is a really strong and interesting point, which LAMI, it contradicts LAMI, and there's something about the way we do it in Hackney where the offer we make is engaged by children irrespective and families irrespective of their ethnicity. So there's something right. We do have a problem at the post-court stage, and that's an engagement with courts and sentencers and CPS and defence solicitors in that sense. I'm less convinced about adultification because I think that, for me, may relate to race, to be honest. Adultification hides issues around race. So I appreciate children being treated as mini adults, and we are always opposed to that. It begins at the Home Office and Ministry of Justice, often within strategic and structural arrangements around legislation. And I'd say the recent Domestic Abuse Violence Act treated children at 16 as if they were adults. So there's a structural issue within the community about really taking up children as children and seen as children first and not offenders second. And I'm happy to lose children first and offenders second, but the Youth Justice Board and the Her Majesty's Inspector of Probation require us to be criminogenic and crime focused.
Thank you. Jackie, did you want to?
Yes, yes, thank you. So in terms of our anti-racist practice, just to comment that we are pulling together as a Children in Education Directorate our anti-racist action plan, which of course includes adultification as a specific issue, because it's not only just in services for children who offend, but it also affects our adolescents who we're working with through Young Hackney and who we're working with through other statutory services. So we're seeing this through a broader lens rather than just specifying in the Children who Offend services, the youth offending service.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take another series of questions from the Commission. So I'll take questions from Volkan and then Councillor Selman and then Salma. So Volkan, over to you and welcome.
Hi, my name is Volkan Gamidagli. I'm the member of Hackney Youth Parliament, one of the leaders, and I study in Hackney New City College. I had a question for Brendan. How do you help to improve the trust with the police and young people, Brendan?
Sorry, I had a glitch there, Volkan. How do I help? Sorry, if you could repeat it.
How do you
please.
help to improve the trust with the police and young people?
Okay. I think the building up of trust is assisted by youth offending teams. We're a multi-agency partnership, Volkan, and I've been involved in youth justice, unfortunately, for quite a number of years. So the last 22 years, I've managed police officers irrespective of my job. So I see part of my role is ensuring that when children come into contact with youth offending, they're coming into contact with also my police officers, my speech and language, my education workers, as well as youth justice officers. And I train and give the same training in things around trauma-informed practice, emotional intelligence and coaching, the effective practice in what works in helping children prevent offending. My officers within youth offending teams are exposed to those same lessons, and we ask them to adopt the same practice where we treat the child as at the centre and their offending as part of a system around them. They are more than just children who have offended. And that's the beginning. So I'm indoctrinating police officers who go off back onto the street to do that work. But also, Jackie and colleagues will hold senior officers to account locally in terms of their behaviour using data and records. And that, as I said, we had a stop and search survey, and the officers who did poorly on that were spoken to and were given words of advice and were retrained. So they're the things I'm in control of. In terms of the things I seek to influence, I will also have conversations with senior police officers locally and nationally to say, this is the lived experience. Children in London in particular, experience policing quite aggressively on the street, and that you need to engage them as a community. The police have improved with us adults in terms of community, but they've been very poor at speaking with children and young people in particular.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Volkan. Now, Councillor Salman, we'll take these two questions together actually. Councillor Salman and then Salma, and then we have some other questions from other Commission members. Sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, I took my hand down rather than taking myself off mute. Sorry, yeah, no, obviously we've got the actual inspection report still to be published, but my sort of understanding is that one of the areas that we'd previously sort of identified ourselves for focus was round about improved partnership, working as a partnership, both at a governance level, but then also in some areas at an operational level. So I think prevention and diversion, working with safer schools officers, for example. So I was just wondering where that was at the moment. And then linked to that, and actually to an extent also linked to the questions that Councillor Conway was also asking, and the reference in the report to the Hackney narrative, which I guess more substantively is about how, as a partnership, the youth justice picture is understood as a partnership, and linked to that then how we approach that and prioritise actions, and whether there's a collective understanding of something as safeguarding rather than just the yacht's perception of it, which I do think is very strongly there, but as a partnership, having that understanding and an understanding of the picture. I just wanted to unpick a bit more of that reference in the report as to where you think things are in terms of a shared partnership, understanding and approach, if there's anything that could be done to improve that, and if there's anything that we could do as a Scrutiny Commission to support that. Sorry, that's quite a large question, but thanks.
Keep that one in mind, and then we're going to Salman, please.
Hi, so I was following on from Volkan's question. How do you plan to access the voices of young people to make sure their lived experiences are heard, how they can help shape and improve services, but build trust in the system as well? And following on from that, how do you work with the wider community, youth clubs, other grassroots community organisations to access a wider range of young people's voices?
Thank you. If you can answer those two, please, and we've got some others with their hands up after.
Okay, in terms of partnership, Councillor Selman, absolutely. The Safeguarding Children Partnership has an interest in youth offending service, and will have some oversight of signing off their annual report as well. But in terms of what we understand about, we know that children are safest when they're in schools and when they're not excluded from schools. So the work around keeping children safe and keeping children actively engaged in and good quality education is one not only for the Safeguarding Children Partnership, it's also for me as the Director of Children Education. And I know that Annie Gammon, who's our Director for Education, has got quite a big programme with schools around reducing exclusions. So as a partnership, we do take this very seriously. There is a strong join-up between the Partnership Board for Children Who Offend, as well as the Safeguarding Children Partnership. I am fairly new, so in terms of actually sampling them both myself, I've yet to do that. But all I can say is from what I've read and what I've seen so far, and what I've for my induction process, that I'm confident that we've got those strong links, and I'm very committed to ensuring that they're absolutely there. And just as I say, in terms of what we understand from, for example, the disproportionality issue, is that any disproportionality in ethnicity, gender, undiagnosed mental health, learning, communication needs, or physical health in our population of children who offend means that as a collective system, we've got to be on this much earlier on and much more assertively, so that we're not seeing these children in the youth offending service. So it's a whole partnership endeavour. It's not just a Hackney Council endeavour at all. And I'm confident we've got partnership buy-in for that.
Yeah, Simon, I'll deal with your question, which I've acknowledged that it's not our strongest aspect of our work at the moment, and I think some of that is linked to the issue around trust, because we can be seen as a justice agency, and justice often means police, but really this is community safety in a process, and I don't think we've got that message across quite right to the broader community. Because I think it's for us to make the effort rather than to engage young people. But those children who have the lived experience of youth justice, and that does mean, unfortunately, children who had cautions or been to court and been sentenced or even been to custody. We're hoping to engage those as they mature, as they reach early adulthood in their late teens, early 20s, to bring them back into the service by giving them accredited experience and qualifications, as well as a fair wage for helping us out in that process. I think asking children who've been through the system to then help us improve it without reward, whether that's accredited learning or whether an hourly wage, is probably one of the reasons we've not been successful to date. So those plans are in place. We will work hard, and conversation with Peter and colleagues in terms of those other colleagues. I would really want children who've had experience of justice experience to give the feedback, because there's a lot of myths around the experience of youth justice, and that lived experience is quite important.
Thank you, Brendan. Actually, on that point, you just reminded me that there was a part of the briefing that I found really interesting, which was where you mentioned the perceptions of crime, youth crime being, exaggerated. But what was really pertinent for me is that this is not what the young people that we've spoken to, that the Young Futures Commission spoke to in their seminal piece of work that they did for us. That's not what they were saying, and that's not what they were saying their experiences were of crime within the borough. And I think that we can set aside moral panics and how the media represent things to your average adult, but the voice of those children for me was really, really quite important, and also being mindful, as something else that you've mentioned in the report, that people often forget that the victims of the perpetrators of crime are often most likely to also be the victims of crime. So it feels that there's a lot more work for us to be done, however it is that we configure that, to speak to young people, the perpetrators who are also, as we know, the victims, to find out why it is that they feel that Hackney is a far less safe place than perhaps the stats suggest it is.
Because there's a lack of trust. So why report? Because nothing happens. So many of the children we work with who are convicted of offences, we then unpack and say there's time to repair harm or make amends for the harm that's been done to you that's been unresolved. So unfortunately, being a victim of crime is a gateway to future offending. Not always, but it's a common feature. So some of our work about making amends is not only making amends to the community, but helping children understand how we can make amends for the harm that's been done to them in the past.
It's certainly food for thought, because it's making me think that obviously we stand out as having apparently low levels of offending, but is this revealing that actually we have quite a problem with young people in the borough's trust of the police and their engagement with the police, and therefore there's underreporting of crime, which means that their experiences are not represented in these figures.
I'm not denying there is high fear of crime, that crime is a concern for children. There's no denial. The HCF, the recent reports understood that, but that does, I think, show a lack of trust. Who in the adult world is protecting children? Who is keeping them safe?
Thank you. So I've got a few other questions now. Councillor Woodley, did you want to come in on any of those points before I go to further questions?
To be honest, I'm coming in slightly cheekily, because I know I'm here as a cabinet member and not a member of the commission, but I do want to ask a question, Chair, if that's okay, which is around the sort of the way that Hackney's strategic context has been set out here. You might recall Orleen Badu doing a piece of work on unconscious bias and talking about young people in the youth justice system with undiagnosed additional needs, or what we might refer to as learning disabilities or as invisible disabilities. And I'm sort of quite surprised that there isn't a bullet, I suppose, acknowledging that, and perhaps the numbers aren't as significant as I'm led to believe. But I would really appreciate a sort of little bit of a clarification, particularly around that point around perpetrators and victims.
Yeah.
So I hope it's okay to come in, sorry, slightly off.
Yeah. I'd just say 6 out of 10 children have undiagnosed or unmet needs around speech and communication, and all our materials are managed through a close partnership and seconded staff with speech and language therapists, and that's how I think we've worked well in the borough. The material and how we talk to children is based on their learning and their developmental level, and that we've stopped using the jargon of youth justice stop using the jargon of youth justice, and help them understand the process. But 6 out of 10 children are entering youth justice with unmet speech and communication needs, and our speech and language team are critical to us helping resolve that.
Sorry, I know I keep interjecting, but just now thinking about the work that you're doing to speak to local officers about stop and search, how is the data that you have, the information that you have on the learning needs? I know that that's influenced the way that you're working with these young people, but are we helping this to inform the way that our police are engaging with our children and young people, knowing that such a significant proportion of them have additional learning needs?
I think that's a very fair point. And my reports to the strategic board, apologies, this is my first report to the Scrutiny Commission. When I talk about reoffending, usually I also then talk about the unmet needs or the harms that children have experienced. So as well as the levels of reoffending, children in youth justice enter with often poor educational engagement and attainment, and a poor history of that. They come with physical or sexual or emotional neglect or abuse as previous, lots of loss and bereavement, and as well as experience of crime as victims.
Thank you, Brenda. I'm now going to take some more questions. I think we've got quite a few people who still want to ask some questions. So I've got Councillor Sizer, I've got Ernell, Councillor Gordon, and then I think we're going to try and take one final round before drawing this to a close. So Councillor Sizer, please.
Councillor Conway's basically said what I was going to say just so well just a few minutes ago. I think the thing that stood out for me in the report was almost the shock of seeing how, compared to some of our neighbouring boroughs, some of the numbers are much lower, and yet the public perception is so often the other way around. And I just wondered if there's been any work done to address this just for wider public, because the more that myth is out there that Hackney is a borough, etc., with problem children, the more it feeds into this awful sort of, stigmatizing of our children. So I just wondered what's been done about that perception, what if any plans are about addressing that. And it was a really poignant bit of the reporting for me. So thank you for highlighting it, but also, how are we going to address this?
Thank you, Councillor Sizer. Anel, can we take your question, please?
First of all, I'd like to say thank you, Brendan, for your report. It was quite succinct and holistic in its context. Most of the questions that I've got here, some items that I've jotted down here has been answered already. Two things that I'm going to bring to your attention around the psychological impact of language. And what do I mean by that? You talked in your report about seeing children as children first. And as a member of a community that is sort of pigmented, I'm wondering each time if there's any work being done around referrals that go to the criminal justice system in giving the ethnicity of a child. And the reason for that, I do know that psychological language can be very, very damaging to the recipient of a referral. And quite honestly, over time, I am very, very, I'm feeling very uneasy of the terms that we are using to describe our children. Do you think that it's time for us to see children as children and not children that are of a different pigmentation or ethnicity? Because in my opinion, that is very, very damaging. I've been in social work for many, many years. I previously was a nurse, and the language has not changed. I think it's time that we need to look at how we refer to members of this human race. And also, I've got poverty here. Do you have any statistics to suggest how poverty impacts on certain groups of our community? And we also have the habit of seeing children as gangs. That is very, very damaging and psychologically disruptive to the professionals who are supporting those individuals, and also to the child and the family themselves.
Thank you. And now, if we can we just have one further question from Councillor Gordon, then we'll try to have some brief responses, please.
Okay, I mean, thanks very much for the report. I mean, I sort of echo the comments that have been very well made by colleagues really in relation to the Hackney narrative and how do we, counter that, partly because of public perceptions of our young people, but I mean also the very real fears that a lot of our young people have of crime and criminalisation, which is something I think which really shapes a lot of lives. But I mean, I've also got two specific questions. I mean, we live in an extremely punitive society where you can come into contact with the criminal justice system at the age of 10, which is absolutely shocking. The sort of for any sort of modern nation, and once you have got any sort of and once you have been in contact with the criminal justice system, your data and DNA can be kept for considerable amounts of time. I mean, how do we? I think you've touched on some of this already, but I mean, how do we support children who do get into contact with the criminal justice system, and in leaving that behind them? And I think some of the work you sound like you've been doing, there is very good and very much in the right direction, but I'd like to know a little bit more. And finally, I'm sorry, I know it's 3 questions. I mean, the Hackney Gangs matrix, I mean, you've mentioned that that's firstly owned by the police, and there's obviously some quite significant issues really about children appearing on that matrix owned by the police. I mean, I do understand it's probably only 10 to 15% of the matrix, and I know that point was being made in relation to the perception, but I mean, that's 10 to 15% too many. There are very significant issues really there, I think, about children being on that matrix, but when they really should be safeguarded.
Thank you. If we can answer those questions.
Okay, if Brendan will take the first issue and I will pick up the issue of language around race and about the use of gangs, if that's okay.
Okay. In terms of the publication or the highlighting and publication of the fact that fewer than 1 in 100 children are involved in the formal and informal youth justice system, I think part of the Scrutiny Commission, that's a part of getting the message out. What I would say is we are working with our colleagues in prevention and diversion who are delivered by Young Hackney, and those success stories we hope to publish that alongside our research with Middlesex University into the equal access that we are offering all children in the borough, irrespective of their gender or ethnicity, to informal disposals, which takes some reference to an informal disposal doesn't create a criminal record. You can move on with that process. A youth caution and a youth conditional caution now are spent on completion. So the Supreme Court ruling recently, as of November last year, any child with a pre-court disposal in our language, which is a youth caution, a youth conditional caution, or a community resolution, will no longer have to disclose that into the future. So we're working, we're slowly developing, giving children a chance to leave adolescent offending behind, and also the referral order as a court order is spent on completion. So, and you will only have to disclose that if you go to a restrictive job like this job as a youth justice worker or a social worker or teacher. But for any other employment, it's not disclosable. And I think in terms of the criminal age of responsibility, yes, Scotland has moved to 12, leaving England behind. So, you know, there may well be time to look at a different age responsibility, but that's well beyond me locally in terms of that process. And in terms of the gangs matrix, I work hard, and it's a joint effort. I work hard with my colleagues to ensure that intelligent children who arrive on the matrix are actually embedded and are actively involved in gang-related serious violence, not just not just been exploited in the drug economy.
Thank you. And just to pick up on the point Brendan was making about the gangs matrix, we talk in children's and education about children who are criminally exploited. Many years ago, we talked about children who we now would say were sexually exploited as being child prostitutes, and we recognised the power dynamic and that children were being exploited sexually, and that was causing, you know, them to be at risk of conditional harm. We view criminal exploitation in much the same way. So whilst Brendan's service may be involved in the defendant's perspective, children for whom we've got grave concern about their safety who are being criminally exploited, we see this as a safeguarding issue, and we see them very much as children. In terms of race and ethnicity being an issue in our youth offending services, I can only empathise with your exasperation that this continues to be an issue, and it continues to be that we have to use this language around describing children who are at the sharp end of our services. I think once we have the publication of the HMIP report of disproportionality, it's a really sobering and unhappy read, having looked at the draft report. That does point to us as a wider system about having to do more, better, be more assertive, and be helping early. So we as a system in Hackney will take this report very seriously, and I would be, you know, I would love us to be part of a society where it wasn't an issue, but unfortunately, seeing the disproportionality of Black and mixed heritage boys in the criminal justice system means that sadly we'll have to focus on that, but hopefully we can focus on that for the right reasons and focus on it to get help early so that children do not end up at that very sharp end of our statutory work.
Thank you very much, Jackie. I think we just have one brief question from Councillor Troughton.
Yeah, it just concerns the stats on page 4, the reoffending stats. And the reason I'm asking is because at our last meeting, we received a report on school exclusions. And bearing in mind that we share a borough command with Tower Hamlets, I would be really interested to see what the statistics for reoffending rates are in Tower Hamlets. I know it's not part of this, you know, similar authorities family, but you know, we share a borough command with them. You know, the same police are on our streets as are on Tower Hamlets streets, and their exclusion rate was incredibly low. I'd just like to see if that played out in terms of reoffending rates. Is it possible to find that, basically?
Yeah, we will be able to. I will make a request of Tower Hamlets, and I can find that information for you.
Thank you.
So I think we're going to bring this item to a close now, but I think what's really clear from the questions is that it's long overdue for us to have a youth justice item on our agenda. And it's clear for us, as we've been sort of immersed in pieces of work looking at the needs of our children with special educational needs and disabilities within the borough, the overrepresentation of certain groups, disproportionality in terms of school exclusions, and in terms of children who are entering and currently in our care system and outcomes for our children in the borough, that this is a really integral piece of that conversation that needs to be had, you know, and that we as a commission need to be contributing towards. So I think that once we've got the report, we can have a look as a commission and feed any responses back to you via email, and we can think about how going forward, we can include an item on youth justice on our work programme going forward. So thank you very much for your briefing, and thank you for coming along this evening. It's been a really important and enlightening piece, I think. So now moving on to item 6, which is the early years strategy, the reconfiguration of children's centres. So further to the confirmation of the early years strategy at Cabinet, a consultation on the reconfiguration of children's centres was launched on the 15th of September 2021. The Commission is being consulted as part of that consultation, which closes on the 16th of November 2021. There are a number of supporting documents in the report pack for this item, which include the early years strategy and details of the Commission on the consultation on the reconfiguration of the children's centres. For this item, again, we have Jackie Burke, the Group Director of Education and Children's Services, and Donna Thomas, the Head of Early Years, Early Help and Wellbeing. We're a bit over time now, so we've got maybe about 30 minutes for this item. So can I ask officers to present key highlights for no more than 5 to 10 minutes, please, and then we'll open up to questions afterwards. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to just say a few brief words. I think Councillor Woodley is going to come in with a few words, and then Donna is going to step us through the main highlights. So you have the Cabinet paper on early years strategy, which is well grounded in research and experience and represents the Council's commitment to give every child in Hackney the best possible start in life. And we recognise that for some, the impact of the pandemic and the inequity of its impact means that for some children in some communities, we must be guided, our early years commitment has to be guided by a strong strategic imperative to support these children, support these groups. We have the strategy 21 to 25 for public communication, and of course we have our 2 consultation documents, which include gathering feedback on the reconfiguration of our children's centres, and the latter is an approach which will yield some savings to support the Council's financial position, but we anticipate we'll have a more, we will limit the impact on children as much as possible, as it's about reach, not building. I'm going to hand to Councillor Woodley now, and then to Donna thereafter. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. First off, I want to say thank you to everyone who has contributed to the development of the early years strategy. I'm looking at Donna Thomas here in particular, and who are engaging, of course, in the current consultation. For me, this work began in 2019 when I was sat on the Scrutiny side of the table, and I was actively involved in a number of site visits, engagement exercises, budget scrutiny, and surveys of our children's centres, the outcomes of all of which began to shape the strategy. My colleagues in Hackney Education took draft versions to the Health and Wellbeing Board and to an Early Help Members Oversight Group. We subsequently held an all-member drop-in, that's for councillors across parties, and I brought a report to the Majority Labour Group. The feedback at each stage of this process has been much appreciated. On presenting the draft strategy to members, I did stress the severity of the savings context in which we were developing the strategy, and said that we would bring a consultation that shared the proposals openly and widely, which I hope you will agree we have done. As you'll have seen set out in the consultation communications, over the past 2 years, we've listened to hundreds of residents, parents, carers, those who would like to become mothers and fathers in the future, as well as other professionals who work with families, to ensure this strategy reflects what is most important to them. They told us the services we provide are invaluable to them, and they are positive about the support they receive from us. Parents with younger children said nurseries, stay and play activities and music lessons are what they care about most. And parents with older children and young people said they really value being able to access a range of different opportunities that work for them. Our early years strategy should protect those services into the future. But we also know there's a growing vacancy rate in nurseries and some of our children's centres, which reflects a London-wide trend of falling reception class roles. And with over a decade of cuts from central government, the pandemic, the criminal cyber attack, we have budget pressures right across the council, and we have to review our discretionary spending. Most of our discretionary spending is wrapped up in our children's centres. This means some really difficult decisions need to be made. And if we don't make them strategically, in other words, by reviewing the whole offer and proposing closures where we have no other option, we will see settings make these decisions for us, withdrawing their offer in a piecemeal way, or continuing to offer provision despite the absolute budget pressures that they are under. It's unsustainable for them. So our aim is to face this head on, and to review and refocus our resources to ensure they have the biggest impact for those who need them most. So our proposals include developing plans to turn 6 children's centres, our kind of strategic centres at present, into new children and family hubs. And they'll bring together services for younger and older children, as well as family-focused support. They will see a wider range of teams of services providing tailored support for families with children of ages 0 to 19. We'll be joining up early years and health visiting systems. We already have an integrated health offer in most of our children's centres, but we'll be joining that up even more closely to provide holistic support and guidance for young children and their families. And we'll be developing 2 of our early years hubs, one in the north and one in the south of the borough, to support families and children with complex needs through the education, health and care plan process. I'm really sorry, I've probably spoken for longer than you'd have liked me to, given that we're running over time, so I'll hand over to Donna there.
Thank you, Councillor Woodley. Apologies, first of all, that I can't get into my laptop, so I have no idea whether you can see my name on screen or not. Thank you. I think both Jackie and Councillor Woodley have said it all, really. There's not much for me to say, other than the consultation, actually. I mean, early years is much wider than children's centres. So the consultation, as set out by Councillor Woodley, is a range of changes. I'm not going to articulate them because they've already been said, alongside the proposed closure of 2 children's centres. And because of those levels of changes, and the most contentious being, or the most sensitive being, the closures of 2 children's centres, that really is will feature quite highly and quite strongly in the consultation that started. So we launched a formal consultation on the early years strategy and changes to Hackney Children's Centres. It's not a consultation in just children's centres, on the 15th of September, and that consultation is due to close on the 16th of November. As part of that, hence why I was late logging on tonight, we have parents' meetings with those parents and carers directly affected by the proposal. And we had a parents' meeting tonight that was well turned out by parents who were voicing, both their concerns about losing community resources, but also giving them the opportunity to understand, face-to-face, in person, the rationale, and to be able to contribute to that in some shape or form. But that, we can't lose sight of the fact that it is a major change for those families that use those provision, and who obviously would like to see the provision remain. Part of the consultation really is about presenting the rationale. So why are we making specific changes to 2 of our children's centres? They're both within the Casenoff ward in the north of the borough. They're both within areas of significant growth, but that growth is not in the mainstream or in the communities that will use mainstream provision. We are seeing falling roles in our nursery classes. I think at the last count there are about 505 vacant nursery places. We're seeing falling roles in our schools, reception in particular, but across primary, where 3 form entry schools are moving to 2 form, 2 forms are moving to 1 form entry because of insufficient children, insufficient demand for nursery places, and we're seeing that play out in the childcare market. COVID has had a huge impact, and we're still really analysing what that impact is and how we respond to that. So we know at the moment we're waiting for data, because our last national data sets were in 2019. We know that children have come back to nursery, come back to learning, with gaps in their social, physical and emotional development, and having to work very closely with our early year settings, where most of our children are, and with the children's centres to think about how we're going to plan to support those children's development, to support accelerated learning and to support parents. That said, we also know that there are 2-year-olds who are eligible for their 15 hours free entitlement that are less likely to take that up. So we're having to go back, having done a lot of work before the pandemic to increase the take up, and we were doing quite well. We're back to the drawing board, and that's important to us, because the research says, if children can access especially those children that are most disadvantaged, can access good quality early years provision, then that can add value to their learning and their development by the end of the foundation stage, by the end of 5 years. The good level of development in 2019 data sets, children in our schools, and I make the distinction of children in schools, 77% of them achieved a good level of development. That said, there were 20 plus who didn't. So we wanted to refocus just to make sure that we were giving children the best start possible. This strategy, whilst it's challenging and offers a way to do things differently with our partners, it also means for some parents taking something away in order to give something back. And that giving something back is thinking about those children who possibly have not had the best service from us, and they are those children with, I say, additional needs. You'll refer to them as children with SEND, and thinking about how we support them better through the assessment process and support them earlier. We also created, we have got statutory duties, responsibilities around advice, support and guidance to parents, statutory duty around the quality of provision, not just children's centres, but all provision, all registered provision. I think we've got 128 registered provision, early years provision in Hackney, supporting all of those provision, and also working with our nursery classes in schools, including independent schools also, and just thinking about some of the principles that will underpin. I'm not going to go through them because you've had the paper and you can see those, but I think the strategy and the consultation and the proposed changes on which we are consulting is really about giving us a refocus, so that we are addressing some of the gaps, some of the shortfalls, some of the disproportionality, and thinking about how we really support parents on that parenting journey. I'm going to stop there and take any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Thank you to you all, to be honest, for your really sort of candid accounts of, of this is not a decision that that any of you have wanted to take, and that you fully appreciate the gravity of this decision and the impact that this will have on our most vulnerable families. And it's very evident to see your commitment to mitigating the impact as much as possible through this consultation process, and helping families to understand the rationale, as you said, Donna, behind the decision making, and to try and support them as best as possible through any changes that are introduced. So now moving on to questions, but can I ask the Commission if we can focus questions initially quite specifically on the children's centre closures? So do I have any members who have any questions on that quite specifically? Yeah. Councillor Troughton, and then Councillor Gordon, did you have one? Okay, Councillor Troughton, then Councillor Gordon.
It's just about the two centres that are closing. They're both in the north of the borough. What's the impact of those closures on surrounding children's centres, other centres nearby? And what sort of impact will those closures have on, I mean, is it likely to reduce the take-up of provision because those two centres are no longer there?
And then Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, I just really want to sort of try and unpick the financial background to this. In relation to the 1 million savings requirement and the additional investment needed for the early years strategy, what is the total amount of savings which is going to be accrued from the closure of the two children's centres, and how is that going to be realised? And what is the additional investment that we need to support development of the wider early years strategy, and in particular the development of the children and family hubs and the additional measures about early identification of children with additional needs that Donna was just talking about? Thank you.
And can I just add one further question to that, and that is that we've been hearing that from you earlier this year, Donna, about how families have been accessing children's centres in a very different way post-pandemic because of presumably the pressures that the pandemic has had, or the changes that families are experiencing in terms of their ways of working and their ability, I suppose, to afford childcare. Do we not anticipate that these will change? And if so, you know, are we making decisions at a time when the way that families are accessing our services are not representative of how they were accessing services pre-pandemic, and how presumably they may go back to accessing services when, if ever, we are at you know, out the other end of this pandemic?
Okay, Councillor Conway, that's probably a good place to start, because that's exactly what the parents said tonight. That's exactly what they wanted to know, and that's exactly what they were asking. Yeah, I think we have to watch and see. I think where I would probably start is, I think everybody in this room knows that the council has to make savings. They're no longer efficiency savings, they are savings, and we have been given a savings target. Those of you that have been previously involved in the review in children's centres that Councillor Woodley mentioned will be very, very aware. And I've lost my trail of thought, so I'm going to come back to that. I can't remember what I was going to say, but I'll come back to that. I think the point about during this period, the change in the take-up of nursery provision, it has changed. We have parents who previously would have used a provision from 7 till 7 or 8 till 6, depending on what time provision opened, are no longer doing that. They're using their 30 hours free entitlement. They're using their 15 hours free entitlement. They're doing the drop-offs and the pickups by themselves. Now, whether that's a short term or a long term, the economy will dictate that. But we've known for some time that there's been changes. So I was in a meeting with other London local authorities this afternoon, and we're all saying the same thing. We're saying that there is a reduction in 2-year-olds taking up their free entitlement. They're seeing less children taking up their provision. In some local authorities, there's been a change in birth rates. We've not had a change in birth rates in Hackney. We tend to have, or we have for as long as I've known, around 6,000 births at the Homerton every year, of which 4,000 are Hackney residents and 2,000 are out of Hackney. That hasn't changed, but that growth is largely in the Orthodox Jewish community rather than in all other communities. And we're also seeing families move out of Hackney for a variety of reasons. So whatever's happening, there is a transition taking place. We don't know how long that will be for, but it's not just as a result of COVID. So prior to COVID, when we do the childcare sufficiency, which I've previously reported on, I think the last time we reported, we said we had 24% vacancy. A couple of years before that, it was 37%. At the moment, I know that we've got 57% childminders all reporting vacancies. So in terms of a trajectory, since 2016, we have seen a change in the use or the take-up of childcare provision, including nursery provision in school. And we have to continue to watch that. You talked about, you know, developing the hubs, developing the 0 to 19 provision, which suggests that there is new money. There is no new money. We're having to make the savings, and we're having to develop as part of existing resources. So when we think about developing the hubs 0 to 19, we're doing that within the resources that we have, but looking at the wider service, at the wider partnership. So working with Young Hackney, the resources in Young Hackney, the resources in our family units, and the resources in early years, and bringing that together to look at how we can have a holistic model that supports families in a way that's helpful to them and not fragmented, which it might be perceived at the moment in some ways. So there is no new money being invested. There's just a reconfiguration of the resources and the way that we use it. And some of those, you know, when we think about health coming in, when we think about working with housing, it's not necessarily about new money, it's about working differently and sometimes working smart and working in a way that is helpful to supporting families with the information they need when they need it, the right time in the right way. The savings from closing these 2 children's centres you know, at the moment it's estimated at 1.2 million. However, the cost of children's centres go up every single year. Salary costs go up, catering costs go up, maintenance costs go up, resources go up. It's not a case of this is how much it costs to run the children's centre. No, every single year it costs us more and more money. And unless that money is coming into the local authority, then the only other way is to put fees up, and we've not been able to do that. So yeah, I now remember what I was going to say about the Commission when we had the review. We were introducing a new fee structure at that time, and that new fee structure really was looking at the subsidy that we have. That was the subsidised childcare, which was spread across all income brackets. And what we did is introduce a new funding model in 2019, or a new fees model in 2019, where we reduced the subsidy towards higher income families in order to support lower income families. So there was almost a redistribution of the funding that we had. But it was a 2-year model. The first year we would achieve our half of our £500,000 savings target, and the second year we would reduce the subsidy even further to hit the 500k target. We didn't introduce the second phase, and we didn't introduce the second phase because we were in COVID, and then as we're emerging out of COVID, we are seeing families take up childcare in a different way. We know that it's had an impact on them. We've seen free school meals go up, increase year on for the last 4 years, for the last 3 years, now hitting 32% children taking up their free school meals, 30% last year, 28% the year before that. So even though we're saying, yes, it's a target to save £1 million, I'm saying, well, actually we could save £1.2 million. The fact that we didn't achieve fully the 500k target that we were given 2 years ago means that there is still a deficit within the budget, and any savings that we make now, all it does is reduce the deficit that we already have. So it's not new money to put back in the service, because there is no money to put back in the service. This is about sustainability. If we had any other way of doing it, then we wouldn't put this on the table, but there is no other way at the moment. And the other question, the first question was, yes, both of these children's centres are in the north of the borough. They're in a small geographical area where there are actually 4 of those centres are in one cluster, 1 in another cluster, but they're all within a 10-minute walk of each other. So we actually have 5 children's centres within a close range of each other, in an area where there's a high growth, but that growth is not going to mean that there are children that we're going to use those provision. They're not going to use the nurseries because they will use the nurseries in the independent sector. What they will use, however, is the wider services, the drop-ins, the stay and play. And by reducing the children's centres within that cluster by 2, we will still have capacity to deliver those wider extended services. Families in Hackney have always, unlike some other areas, they've always used children's centres across Hackney. So very few are wedded to using one children's centre to attend stay and play or any other activities that are taking place. They've always travelled across Hackney, and even by reducing the children's centres by 2 within that geographical area, there are still 3 other centres, very busy, very popular, very well-used centres. I'm hoping I've answered those 3 questions.
Yeah, very well. You have, thank you. Councillor Woodley, did you want to come in on that?
I was only to add a note of assurance to Councillor Troughton on that last point, and perhaps to compliment Donna a bit, who I feel has probably had a bit of a grilling today. That when we've had a previous closure, we went to a great deal of trouble to make sure that the parents were well informed, families were well informed about the alternative options. And I have to say that although they were extremely alarmed and concerned initially, the work was such that they all found suitable provision and were very happy, relatively happy with the kind of outcome. So I just want to say that you should have a little bit of confidence, I hope, in how we'll manage this situation, even though, as Donna said, and we all agree, this is not a situation any of us want to be in.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Jackie wanted to come in. Please let me know if other members of the Commission have any questions that they would like to ask.
Thank you, Chair. Just to kind of reiterate in terms of the detail and the research and the evidence that Donna and her team have gone into in order to make these proposals it's been really vast, and I commend them all for that, and particularly Donna's leadership. Whilst it's really painful to take anything away from residents in Hackney, and it feels really difficult at this particular point where our residents have had a really tough time through COVID. As an authority, we are particularly rich in our children's centre provision. We will still have 18 children's centres if we do close 2, which is significantly more than most of our neighbours in terms of the offer that we have available regarding childcare, but also in terms of the support. So, as I say, it's really painful to think of taking anything away, but we still have a very rich offer. And I think the distinction between the childcare and the family support and the other activities is really important. So sometimes you can get wedded to buildings as a way of supporting families, but actually it's about the reach. So Donna's been very clear in articulating the impact in the north of the borough and how that's mitigated. But the work that Donna and Pauline Adams are doing on looking at creating family hubs will mean that in terms of when needs are identified in families where they've got children aged 0 to 19, those hubs centred around those children's centre strategic sites will be able to outreach and have and reach across the entire of Hackney. So I'm really keen that we don't just focus on buildings as how families are supported, it's actually the services and the quality of the service and the reach from our established centres. Thank you.
I just have another question that I wanted to ask about what does this mean for the remaining 18 children's centres? And I appreciate what you said initially, Councillor Woodley, about how instead of just proposing closing 2 children's centres because they were no longer financially viable, that this required a sort of review of the whole strategy to ensure that this made sense for us going forward. But do we feel that, do we have any confidence that the other 18 children's centres are not going to be in a similarly sort of vulnerable position going forward?
I would like to offer confidence, and I think that's something that there's going to be quite a lot of discussion around sort of budget decisions in the coming months, actually, because we're really at a crunch moment right now, looking ahead. But we are in a vulnerable moment. Again, in terms of offering assurance, there was really good work done previously in terms of attracting families to bring their 2-year-olds to our centres. So I have confidence that we'll do a good job there again in encouraging that. I do think in terms of, our sort of understanding of which centres it made sense to kind of propose closure for and which ones to sustain, I think we've made the right decision there in terms of our understanding of our demographics. And there should be some relief, I guess, on those neighbouring centres if those families move across to there. I suspect the sort of exodus, if you like, that we've seen in Hackney began with the sort of the housing prices, housing costs, and then that doubled down with the pandemic. And do I really want to use the B word with Brexit? We've seen families leave. It could be that settles now. It is a bit of a guessing game. But I think our other 18 centres are in a very good position. We've been very clear that we do not want to hollow out those services, although I appreciate what Jackie says about it's not about buildings. The frustration for all of us in this is that all of our centres, we're reaching the people that we want them to reach, and it is good for people to have a sense of where to go, to feel that in the sort of neighbourhoods work that we're doing, that you have your children's centre, your local park, your school, that you have this sense of what's in your area. And it's kind of distressing to disrupt that. But I think what we have to do is look carefully at how we now build on what remains, offer that reassurance, offer the training that's in place to make sure that those centres feel well equipped and that staff kind of aren't impacted in their morale in this moment. and then perhaps report back to you. I think you've got me down for a sort of cabinet member questions in a couple of months' time, so that'd probably be a good moment to report back to you on where we think everyone's at.
Thank you very much for that. I'm wanting to sort of extend the questions now out a bit more broadly to the strategy more generally. Although I am also conscious of time, but just wondering, in particular at 6.4.1, it states that the early years strategy presents an opportunity for integrated funding for local health and education support services. I know, Donna, that you mentioned that there is no extra money, there is no additional money, but will early years strategy provide an opportunity to lever in additional funding to support shared early years ambitions and priorities with our partners? I'll just ask another one also, and that is that in relation to the early help strategy, how will the early years strategy synchronise with other key council strategies, for example, the community strategy and the upcoming early help strategy? Because I'm conscious that in the early years strategy, we've mentioned that our health partners, for example, the CCG, have developed 8 local neighbourhoods for integrated health, mental health and care support. So how are the different geographical fits in relation to these different strategies going to come together? So just leave you with those initially. I don't know if anybody else has any.
No, that was.
Yeah. Sorry,
sure.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, I did ask a question earlier really about the, the funding for the new family and children hub. And I'm not sure in asking a huge amount of questions, Donna, whether you managed to maybe give us enough detail on that. So it might be good to hear a little bit more about really the sort of what the what the costs and funding sources are going to be for the development of family hubs.
If I can come in about the family hubs and the early health strategies, that would be helpful. So in terms of the family hubs and them being kind of strategic sites, that is more part of what the early help piece is about, which isn't yet here for the Scrutiny Commission to review. So the reason it's referenced in the early years strategy is because it is very interlinked. So we will be bringing that piece of work to you very shortly. We have got a date to present that to you. In terms of the funding for those hubs, we haven't got the figures now. We will bear that in mind when we bring the paper to you. But Donna was absolutely right. There is no additional funding. The work of the early help review was reviewing the in-house provision for early help from Hackney Council, and that included those provided by children's centres, which come with Donna, and those provided in children's social care, and those provided through Young Hackney. So we are working towards pulling a more coherent offer together in-house. And thereafter, there will be more work with the wider partnership to develop a partnership-wide early health strategy. So I'm just very clear that the work that's been done on the early help piece has been about the provision of Hackney Council, not about the wider early help strategy. And we will bring that to you shortly, and we will bring to you as part of that what the sum of that cost is. Don is absolutely right. There is no additional resource in that. We are using our existing resources to reshape the offer in a more coherent way, because what we're very committed to is that people know how to access it, they know what the offer is, and also in terms of our ability to quality assure and performance manage that, so we know that the right family's getting the right help at the right time and a good quality service. That will enable us to do that better as well. But we will bring that to you in greater detail at the future commission.
Thank you, Jackie. I was going to suggest that you took that question, so just as well you did. With regards to health visiting in early years, I think the key thing there is about working towards greater integration. We already work very, very closely with our health visiting colleagues, but it is a contract. More recently, it's a contract between our public health colleagues and the Homerton to deliver the health visiting service. And so whilst we do work closely together because we have to, we are working with the same set of children, the same set of parents, to the shared priorities. So our statutory priorities are around supporting a good level of development at the end of nursery. They also have the same priority. They call it high impact areas for health visiting, but it's the same areas. So if you think about, we are working to the same outcomes we're wanting to achieve, and it's just about how can we do that better without some of the bureaucratic processes that prevents us from getting access to the information that we need in order to support parents, families early. So if we can start to, and we've started the conversations with our colleagues in public health, starting that conversation about, under the new contract, the current contract was due to end this year. Because of COVID, it's been rolled forward to 2023, I think it is. So we will be working during this, between now and then, to redesign the health visiting service. And as part of that, looking at how we can work greater together. The intention really isn't about savings, but the intention is about using the resources that we have in a way that allows us to intervene earlier. And I think COVID, the last 18 months have shown that actually, whilst we work quite well together, the fact that we are two separate organisations, the Homerton and the local authority, meant that we actually couldn't get the information that we needed in order to support parents early. And when parents have finally, been able to access the services, I think what they're saying is, well, one, they wish that we would be able to support them earlier, and we can't without the information. So I think that is one of the motivators, one of the drivers for saying, actually, there's an opportunity here for the council to think about how it uses its own resources and not automatically go out to recommission in the same way that we have historically done. Yes, we need a health provider. Yes, we need the governance. Yes, we need those health visitors to have a professional body, but we also need to be able to work a bit more fluid than we certainly have done over the last 18 years. And actually, it's children that haven't had the best support because of that. That needs to change. So that's what that allows us to do. If there are savings within that, then that's great. But actually, it's about using the resources that we have got in a way that prevents duplication and means that actually we can work better together to support those children and their families. With regards to the CCG, 8 neighbourhoods, that is developing. We've got 6 children centre clusters, and the clusters aren't about containing children and families, it's for planning purposes. And the CCG 8 clusters or neighbourhoods is really about the same thing. So we are working closely with them, especially with the neighbourhood in the north of the borough, Woodgreen Wetlands. So our early years multi-agency team supports to families. Our early help system has been working very closely with the development of the neighbourhoods multidisciplinary teams for adults, because we know there's a gap between adults and children not really talking. So if you're an adult and you've got support from adult services, whether that be mental health support or adult social care, and you've got a young child, sometimes that child doesn't feature in the way that might be more helpful. And again, when we're working with children in an early help or a targeted way, we're often needing to, because the only way you can support the child is through their families, through their parents, through their networks around them. So we spend a lot of time trying to contact those adult services that are involved with the parents. So we've been trialling some development there, and the early signs coming out of that are actually really good, because we're starting the conversation around how we can work better together and how we can form some of those bridges and pilot them with a view to rolling them out further, to testing them, and then rolling them out as part of the early help review, but also as part of the development of the neighbourhoods. The reason why, so we muted for a long time, and I have been part of the neighbourhoods, as colleagues have also been, thinking about, well, you know, why don't you just have 6 clusters planning areas that are very similar to the children's centres, because they're already there. And they made it really clear, you know, for good reasons, actually, the health service, they want an optimum number of patients to work with, and if they were aligned to our 6 clusters, their cohort would be far too big. So that's why they've got the neighbourhoods, and all we've done is mapped our clustered into their neighbourhoods in order that there is an element of planning and between the structures that are in place. So the fact that there's the neighbourhoods and there's the clusters won't make a difference. There is an intention and a commitment to work together, to plan together, to address what we perceive to be some of the gaps. And, you know, working between children and adult services has been one of those gaps. Strengthening the links between GPs, health visiting, and midwives has been another gap. So there have been opportunities to develop, to test, to pilot together, and to build that back into the wider system.
Thank you. Did you get notes? Yeah. Okay. Great. There are a few other questions, although I'm conscious of time. Really, I've just got one. If you could just very briefly, just wanting to know, in terms of the proposals for SEND services being delivered through the early years hubs in both the north and the south of the borough, will these be funded through the high needs block? Or
Yes. Well, yes. So the intention there is not about the intention there is through the SEND. It's the SEND strategy and the early year strategy working together, which is really how it should be. The collaboration, thinking about where some of the gaps are and how, as part of the wider SEND strategy and the high needs block, how we fund additional provision. So yes, it's not early years funding; it is SEND funding through the high needs block.
Thank you very much for that. And now I think we're going to bring this item to a close. So the Commission will review the consultation summary with discussions from today and formally write to the Cabinet member with its response before the end of the consultation deadline on the 16th of November. Once again, thank you all for your contributions this evening and for the work that you're doing to support families in the borough at what is undoubtedly a really challenging time for us as a local authority, with the financial pressures that we're under, and sadly that with no sense of when we're likely to see any increased funding to support our families at what is also a really challenging time for most people in the country, not just the borough. Thank you again. So now moving on to the next item, which is item 7, which is the work programme. I skipped the minutes. I think I'm at the right place. So just the work programmes. The latest version of the work programme for the Commission is contained in the report pack, which details a number of updates. Scrutiny officer will take us through some of the new additions to the work programme for the upcoming meetings.
Just quickly, just to highlight some of the main changes which have evolved since the last meeting. So our next meeting, which Jackie's already highlighted, we're going to take an update on the early help strategy and what's before that's kind of finalised through, and also we're having the school estate strategy as well, which the Director of Education is going to come and talk to. That's in relation to the kind of falling school roles and the need to kind of re-provision some SEND services within the borough boundaries. Further down the field, we're looking at, in terms of March next year, we're looking to look at the role of our school improvement partners and how they are used, to understand more about their role and how we can use that to kind of close the attainment gap. And also, we're looking at the kind of parental involvement in education and their kind of relationship, parents' relationship with schools. There's a project which I think is just starting. I think that will kind of report back to us back in March. To say that the programme is evolving, and we'll kind of update members as we go through. There's obviously a number of suggestions which are still working to provide within the work programme as well, which members have had. So there are other opportunities that we will have in terms of our opportunities to have members, the cabinet members, when they have their Q&A, that we can identify some of those issues there which come through our suggestions for we can cover in our work programme as well. So to say that's.
Thank you very much, Martin. So, and also just to note that Councillor Woodley, as she mentioned, has her Q&A on the 6th of December in the Commission. We still need to come up with topics for her to cover by the 15th of October, so we'll be emailing about that. Are there any comments about the work programme or items that are coming up?
I should say, sorry, we're just finalising off the scope for our prospective review for this year. It's about adolescents entering social care. So once we've kind of agreed that, we will share that with Jackie and Diane to kind of agree that what our kind of work will be for that for this year. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Now moving on to item 8, which is the minutes. So the minutes of the last meeting held on the 12th of July are in the report pack. There were a number of actions from that meeting, including further data from the Children and Families Service on children placed in residential care and children placed in semi-independent care, which can be found right at the back of the pack. I'd just like to thank officers for that. It was made for a really sobering read, and it's very clear the challenges that we're facing as a service. Under some, it's just eye-watering the amount of money that we're spending on these provisions, and I'm just really encouraged to see that this is a priority for us to review and to reflect on getting the best service for our children and young people, and appreciating that doesn't always mean the most expensive. And also just to say that, again, it was made for a really sobering read, because yet again, we're hearing about the same overrepresentation, disproportionality for Black children, children of dual heritage, children with ADHD, children with autism, and more generally children with additional needs. It will remain a focus for us, this issue of disproportionality across the piece, children's social care, education, and I do hope that the work that we do as a Scrutiny Commission can support the work that you're doing and supplement the work that you're doing, so that we can tackle these issues of disproportionality that are blighting our borough. I have to say, it doesn't make for a pleasant read to keep hearing the same families slipping through the net. So it will remain high on our agenda, certainly. There are detailed reviews in the report that will make for really helpful contribution towards the work that we are going to be doing in our upcoming review, looking at adolescents entering the care system. So thank you very much again for this. Now, item 9, any other business? Don't have any other business aside from the date of the next meeting is the 1st of November 2021. So thank you, everybody. You've managed to finish on time, before time, which was impressive. So thank you all for coming and for your contributions this evening.
Thank you, Chair.